The old man froze, his morning coffee suspended halfway to his lips as the German shepherd's howl cut through the Missouri dawn like a blade through prayer. It wasn't a bark or a whimper. It was the exact same desperate cry he'd heard 50 years ago in Da Nang, when Duke saved his unit from an ambush. His neighbor's kitchen window exploded inward as a massive log struck, sending Margaret screaming into her husband's arms. The river was taking everything. Cars, trees, propane tanks spinning like toys. But Bill Hartley only saw the dog. She stood on splintering debris, 3 puppies pressed against her soaked body, wearing a collar he'd buried with his own hands decades ago. "Sweet Jesus," Bill whispered, his heart medication bottle clattering across Eleanor's clean floor, pills scattering like promises. "That's Duke's collar. That's Duke's exact collar." "Dad!" Sarah's voice crackled through the dying phone line. "Dad, get out now!" But how could he leave her again? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William Bill Hartley had lived beside the Missouri River for 23 years, but the water had owned him for much longer. At 68, his hands bore the road map of a hard life. Scars from K-9 training in Vietnam, rope burns from pulling Duke's body from a mine crater, liver spots from years of working construction after the war nobody wanted to talk about. His cabin sat a quarter-mile from the riverbank, close enough to hear the water's moods but far enough to avoid its tantrums, or so he'd thought. The foreclosure notice lay on his kitchen table beside Eleanor's medical bills, their edges curling in the humid air. 30 days, the bank said. 30 days to leave the only place that still smelled like her lavender hand cream, where her coffee mug sat untouched for 2 years, where he could still hear her humming Amazing Grace while folding laundry. The Social Security check, $1,247 a month, barely covered his heart medication and utilities. The life insurance money had become a battlefield between him and Sarah, their grief weaponized into legal documents and bitter phone calls. Sarah blamed him for everything, for being gone when Eleanor's cancer returned, for choosing pride over treatment options, for selling her childhood home to pay for the inadequate care. But mostly, she blamed him for surviving when her mother didn't. The last time they'd spoken, really spoken, not just exchanged accusations through lawyers, was at Eleanor's funeral. Sarah had stood at the grave, her real estate blazer wrinkled, mascara streaking down cheeks that looked too much like her mother's, and said, "You taught me everything about duty and nothing about love." The German shepherd on the debris raft couldn't be connected to his past. That was impossible. Duke had died in 1971, his bloodline ended with military precision. But that collar, faded green canvas with brass hardware, the way she held her head despite terror, the protective curve of her body around those puppies, every detail screamed a truth his rational mind rejected. Bill had trained dozens of German shepherds after Vietnam, had seen hundreds more. But only Duke's lineage carried that particular tilt of the ear, that specific way of breathing under stress. Thunder cracked overhead, and Bill reached for his medication, 2 pills left. Dr. Morrison had warned him about rationing, but what choice did he have? Medicare covered the visits, but not enough of the prescription. He'd been cutting pills in half, skipping doses, playing Russian roulette with his failing heart. Eleanor would have scolded him, would have driven to Canada herself for cheaper medication. Eleanor would have known what to do about the dog. Eleanor always knew what to do about everything. The storm had started 3 days ago, as a whisper, the kind of April rain that farmers pray for and riverside residents ignore. Bill had watched the weather report with the same detachment he'd shown everything since Eleanor's death. Just another thing happening in a world that had stopped mattering. The young meteorologist with too much makeup had pointed at swirling graphics, used words like unprecedented and historic. But Bill had lived through historic before. Historic was Tet. Historic was holding your best friend while he bled out in a rice paddy. This was just rain. By the second day, when Riverside's volunteer fire department started knocking on doors with evacuation notices, Bill had simply shaken his head. This cabin survived the flood of '93, he'd told Randy Hutchins, who wasn't even born during that flood. It'll survive this one. Randy had looked at the stacks of unopened mail, the dishes in the sink, the empty prescription bottles lined up like soldiers on the counter, and left without arguing. Small towns knew when to push and when to let a man choose his own ending. The morning of the third day arrived like an ambush. At 5:47 a.m., Bill's usual wake-up time since Vietnam, the world outside had transformed into something primordial. The sound came first. Not the familiar murmur of the Missouri, but a roar that vibrated through the cabin's foundation. Then came the howling, so distinctive and desperate that it yanked him from his chair before his conscious mind could process why. Through the kitchen window he saw impossible things. The Hendersons' chicken coop sailing past like a ship. A pickup truck. Was that Jim Morrison's new Ford, tumbling end over end in the current? And there, perhaps 30 feet from what used to be his riverbank, a makeshift raft of debris carrying a German Shepherd mother and 3 puppies who couldn't have been more than 2 weeks old. Bill's hands shook as he reached for his rifle, an old habit that would never die. Check your weapon first, secure the perimeter, then assess the situation. But the M16 of memory became Eleanor's decorative walking stick in reality, and the soldier became just an old man with a bad heart, watching tragedy unfold through glass he hadn't cleaned in months. The dog's howl came again, and this time his body responded before his mind could interfere. He dropped the coffee mug, Eleanor's favorite, the one with "World's Best Grandma" that Sarah had given her before the estrangement, before the cancer, before everything went to hell. It shattered on the linoleum, sending brown liquid across the yellow flowers Eleanor had chosen because they reminded her of her mother's kitchen. The sound of breaking ceramic triggered something primal. Suddenly, he was 22 again, in the highlands outside Da Nang, watching Duke alert to movement in the elephant grass. The German Shepherd had that same head tilt, that same desperate vocalization that meant "danger, help now" in the wordless language between handler and dog. Duke had died 30 seconds later, taking the mind blast meant for Bill and 3 other boys from places like Ohio and Georgia and California. "It can't be," Bill whispered, but his feet were already moving. Through the back door, past Eleanor's dead garden, toward the shed where he kept things that didn't belong in the house. Old tools, broken promises, and, his hands found it without looking, a coil of yellow nylon rope rated for 300 pounds, the same kind they'd used for river crossings in country. That's when he saw the banker's box, knocked from its shelf by his frantic searching. Duke's Things, written in Eleanor's careful script across the top. He'd never opened it, had ordered her to burn everything. But Eleanor had her own kind of stubborn courage. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like holy relics, lay photos he'd forgotten existed. Young Bill with Duke at Fort Benning, Duke alerting during training, and at the bottom, a smaller photo that stopped his heart more effectively than any arterial blockage. Sarah, maybe 7 years old, arms wrapped around a German Shepherd puppy. On the back, Eleanor's handwriting. Sarah and Duke 3rd, summer 2019, convinced Bill to let her try again. The landline rang, startling him back to the present. Nobody called the landline except telemarketers and, "Dad? Dad? Jesus Christ, are you still there? The news says Riverside is underwater. Dad, please." "Sarah." His voice came out strangled, foreign. "Sarah, did you have a dog named Duke?" "What? Dad, you need to get out." The Riverside Bridge just static, consumed her voice, then nothing. The line was dead. Bill stood in the doorway of the shed, looking from the photos to the dog fighting for her life on the river, understanding flooding through him like the water consuming his world. Grace, that's what the faded tag on her collar would say. He remembered now, Eleanor's voice cutting through his Scotch-fueled haze 5 years ago. Sarah named her Grace, Bill. Said every Duke needs Grace to survive. He'd thrown the Scotch glass at the wall, told Eleanor that Sarah had no right to that name, that legacy, that Duke was his, not hers, not anyone's. The next morning, Sarah's marriage fell apart. She moved to Kansas City and the dog disappeared. Nobody talked about it, just another casualty in the war between father and daughter. Now Grace was out there, drowning with her babies while he stood on dry land doing nothing. Again. Bill's chest tightened, the familiar squeeze that meant he needed medication. He fumbled for the prescription bottle, shook out the last 2 pills. The label mocked him. Take twice daily, do not skip doses. He dry swallowed both, knowing it meant tomorrow he'd have none. But tomorrow had stopped mattering when he'd seen that collar. He found himself at Eleanor's secretary desk, pulling out her lavender stationery. His hands moved without conscious thought. Sarah. Mom was right. Love multiplies. If you find this, know that I finally understood. The river gave me one more chance to choose different. I'm choosing Duke. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing love. Dad. The rope felt right in his hands, the weight of it, the purpose. He tied one end to the porch's support beam, the kind of knot that would hold against current. The other end went around his waist, another ghost from training, Swiss seat harness, modified for water work. His joints protested, arthritis and age fighting against muscle memory, but the movements came back like lyrics to a hymn. At 6:23 a.m., William Hartley entered the Missouri River for the last time. The water hit like a full-body punch, cold beyond description, violent beyond measure. His first stroke triggered chest pain that radiated down his left arm. His second stroke brought him closer to Grace, who had stopped howling to watch him with eyes that held too much recognition. "Hold on, girl," he gasped, though the current stole his words. "Just hold on." The water hit Bill's chest like a sledgehammer made of ice. Every nerve screamed in protest as the Missouri River, swollen with 3 days of biblical rain, tried to claim him immediately. The current grabbed his legs, spinning him sideways before he could establish position. This wasn't the lazy river of summer fishing trips or the manageable flow of spring. This was nature turned predator, brown water thick with debris and destruction. 20 feet. That's all that separated him from Grace and her puppies. 20 feet that might as well have been 20 miles. Bill forced his body to remember. Diagonal approach, swim upstream of the target, let the current help. His first real stroke sent fire through his chest. Not the cold, but the familiar squeeze of his failing heart protesting the shock. He'd felt this pain before, had ignored it before, but never while fighting a river that wanted him dead. The rope around his waist pulled taut, a lifeline that was also a leash, limiting his range but keeping him anchored to something solid. Grace had stopped howling. She stood perfectly still on the deteriorating raft, her body a protective arch over 3 small forms. Even from here, Bill could see her legs trembling with the effort of maintaining balance as the makeshift platform bucked and twisted. Her eyes, those intelligent German shepherd eyes that seemed to hold memories no dog should carry, locked onto his with an intensity that pierced through 40 years of careful forgetting. "Good girl," he gasped, though the river stole the words before they could reach her. "Just like Duke. Just hold on." 600 miles away, Sarah Hartley Morrison was breaking every traffic law in Missouri. The phone call had cut off mid-sentence, her father's voice replaced by the static of infrastructure failing. She'd tried calling back 17 times. Each attempt met the same recorded message: all circuits are busy. The morning news played on her car radio, the announcer's professional calm barely containing the underlying panic. Riverside completely cut off as the bridge collapsed at 6:15 this morning. Emergency services report the Missouri River has exceeded the 500-year flood stage. Residents who fail to evacuate are urged to seek higher ground immediately. Sarah white-knuckled the steering wheel of her Lexus, the one she'd leased to project success she didn't feel, payments she couldn't afford after the divorce. Kansas City's morning traffic crawled around her, oblivious to her emergency. In the passenger seat, a banker's box held papers she'd grabbed without thinking. Her mother's letters, documents from the estate lawyer, photos she hadn't looked at in 2 years. Tucked between insurance forms was a snapshot that made her throat close. Herself at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, hugging a German Shepherd puppy. She remembered that day, remembered her father's hands shaking as he'd said, "This is Duke the Third, baby girl. You take care of him. He'll take care of you." She'd promised solemnly, the way children do when they don't understand that some promises are too big to keep. The radio crackled. Helicopter footage shows numerous residents still trapped. Swift water rescue teams from 3 counties are responding, but conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Sarah punched the accelerator, cutting off a semi-truck to reach the exit. She had 4 hours of highway between her and Riverside. 4 hours to reach a father she'd spent 2 years hating for crimes that seemed smaller with each mile. Back in the river, Bill had covered half the distance. His modified combat stroke, energy efficient, designed for long crossings under fire, was the only reason he hadn't been swept downstream already. But efficiency meant nothing when your heart was struggling to pump blood turned thick by cold and adrenaline. Each breath came harder, each stroke weaker. Debris filled the water like a moving minefield. A section of someone's roof nearly clipped his skull. A propane tank, still somehow floating, spun past close enough to touch. He saw impossible things in his peripheral vision. A child's bicycle, its pink streamer still attached. A church pew, hymnal still tucked in the back. The detritus of lives interrupted, reduced to river hazards. Grace shifted on the raft and Bill heard the crack of wood giving way. One of the main logs, already compromised, split lengthwise. The platform tilted dramatically. One puppy, the smallest, colored like coffee with too much cream, slid toward the edge. Grace's jaw shot out, catching it by the scruff just as its tiny body would have hit the water, but the movement cost her balance. Her hind legs slipped, claws scrambling for purchase on wet wood. "No!" The word tore from Bill's throat, giving him strength he didn't have. 3 more strokes, muscles burning, chest squeezing. 2 more. 1. His hand touched the edge of the raft just as another log broke free. Grace looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, Bill saw recognition that transcended logic. She knew him, not just as a human who might help, but as someone specific, someone connected to her past, to the name on her collar, to the legacy she carried in her DNA. Very slowly, fighting every maternal instinct, Grace lowered the cream-colored puppy toward Bill's outstretched hand. "That's it," Bill whispered, treading water with legs that felt like concrete. "Trust me, girl, just like your great-granddad did." The puppy was impossibly small, maybe 6 inches long, eyes still sealed shut. Bill tucked it inside his jacket, zipping it against his chest where body heat might keep it alive. As the tiny thing mewed once, a sound so innocent it broke something inside him, then settled against his undershirt. Grace was already reaching for the second puppy, a male with the classic black and tan coloring that made German Shepherds instantly recognizable. This one was larger, stronger, fighting against being moved. But Grace was patient, firm, the way good mothers are when survival depends on cooperation. She delivered him to Bill's waiting hands just as another section of raft broke away. The platform was disintegrating faster now. What had been a 10-foot square of debris was now less than 6 feet and shrinking. Grace's weight, distributed to keep the remaining structure stable, was the only thing preventing complete collapse. She looked at the third puppy, a female, dark like her mother, then back at Bill. "Give her to me," Bill urged, fighting to keep his head above water. The rope around his waist had saved him from the current but limited his mobility. He couldn't circle to a better position, couldn't do anything but tread water and wait. Grace made a decision. She grabbed the third puppy and stepped to the edge of what remained of the raft. For a moment, Bill thought she would jump, would try to swim with her baby. Instead, she did something that would haunt him forever. She held the puppy out over the water, looking directly into Bill's eyes, waiting. "I've got her," he promised, understanding flooding through him. "I'll save them all. You have my word." It was the same promise he'd made to Duke in 1971, kneeling in mud and blood, cradling a dying hero. The same words, the same tone, the same desperate need to be worthy of such trust. Grace released her last puppy into Bill's care. That's when the rope jerked. The sudden movement wasn't the steady pull of current. It was violent, directional. Bill was yanked backward, away from the raft, the puppies in his jacket crying out as water splashed over them. He fought to return, to grab Grace, to complete the rescue, but the rope pulled again, harder. On the shore, invisible through rain and river spray, someone was reeling him in. "No!" Bill screamed, watching Grace's platform shed another crucial piece. "Not yet! Grace!" The German shepherd stood on what amounted to driftwood now, maybe 3 feet of unstable timber. She could have jumped, could have tried to swim for shore or grab onto Bill's rope. Instead, she sat down in the perfect heel position, the way military dogs were trained to do when awaiting orders. Her eyes never left Bill's face as the distance between them grew. The current caught the remains of her raft, spinning it toward the main channel where the water ran fastest, deepest, most violent. Toward the dam, Bill fought against whoever was pulling him, fought against the rope, fought against the betrayal of being saved when he'd come to do the saving. But his strength was gone, his heart was stuttering, and the cold had locked his muscles into uselessness. He could only watch as Grace, magnificent, brave Grace, rode her disintegrating platform into the maelstrom. The last thing he saw before hands hauled him onto muddy ground was Grace's tail wagging once as if to say, "Good human, mission complete." Then the river took her, and Bill Hartley's damaged heart finally stopped. Bill Hartley's world contracted to the space between heartbeats, that eternal pause where time stops and decisions crystallize into destiny. His body floated face down in the muddy shallows, rope tangled around his torso, 3 puppies crying against his chest. Above him, hands grabbed and pulled, voices shouted words that meant nothing. Below him, in that peculiar clarity that comes with cardiac arrest, memories flowed like the river itself. Eleanor in her wedding dress, 19 and fearless, saying, "I do," to a boy broken by war. Sarah's first breath, the midwife placing her on Eleanor's chest while Bill sobbed harder than he had since Duke died. Teaching Sarah to swim in this very river, her chubby arms trusting him completely as he walked backward, promising he wouldn't let go, the same river that now claimed everything. Got him. "Pull, damn it, pull!" The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, Riverside's hardware store owner whose grandfather had served with Bill's father in World War II. Marcus had been driving to check on his store when he'd seen the old man enter the water. Without thinking, he'd stopped, grabbed the rope, and started hauling. Now, knee-deep in mud and floodwater, he fought to drag Bill's lifeless body to safety. "He ain't breathing," Marcus's nephew Tyler said, his 20-year-old face pale with shock. "Mr. Webb, he ain't—" "Shut up and help me!" Together they wrestled Bill onto solid ground, or what passed for it, with the water rising 6 inches every 10 minutes. Marcus ripped open Bill's jacket, found the puppies, impossibly still alive, and thrust them at Tyler. "Hold these!" Then he started compressions, counting like his CPR instructor had taught him, like the life of his father's friend's son depended on each precise movement. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Sarah hit the police roadblock at 70 miles per hour, slamming her brakes just in time to avoid plowing through the sawhorses. The Missouri Highway Patrol officer who approached her window looked exhausted, his uniform soaked despite rain gear. "Ma'am, you can't— My father's in Riverside, William Hartley. He's still there. He called me. The line went dead." The officer's expression shifted. "Hartley? The veteran with the cabin by Dockery Creek?" "Yes. Is he— Did someone—" "Ma'am, I need you to pull over there." He pointed to a cluster of emergency vehicles. "Search and rescue is coordinating evacuee information. They'll know more." But Sarah was already out of her car, running toward the command post. The scene that greeted her was controlled chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances, boats on trailers, people in various uniforms consulting maps and radios. She grabbed the nearest official, a woman with Captain Reeves on her jacket. "Please, my father, William Hartley." Captain Reeves consulted a water-stained clipboard. "No William Hartley on the evacuee list." "When did you last have contact?" 40 minutes ago. He called about a dog, something about Duke." "Wait." A younger firefighter looked up from his radio. "Did you say Duke?" "Captain Marcus Webb just called in. He's got an elderly man pulled from the river attempting resuscitation." Said the guy kept saying Duke before he went under. Sarah's legs gave out. Captain Reeves caught her, guided her to a camp chair. "Where?" Sarah managed. "Near what's left of Dockery Bridge. But ma'am, the roads are gone. The only way in is—" "Helicopter." The voice came from behind them, deep and commanding despite its Texas drawl. Sarah turned to see a man in his late 60s, military bearing, obvious despite civilian clothes. "Name's Mike Dennison. That stubborn fool Bill Hartley saved my life in '71. Me and some boys from the unit got a bird standing by in Boonville. That's 30 miles from here," Captain Reeves said. 28, Mike corrected. "We've got flight clearance and a pilot who flew dust off in Afghanistan. Ma'am," he turned to Sarah, "if you're Bill's daughter, your family. River rats don't leave family behind." While Sarah climbed into Mike Dennison's truck, while a helicopter full of Vietnam veterans prepared for one more rescue mission, Grace fought the Missouri River with the tenacity bred into her bloodline. The raft was gone, dissolved into its component parts, leaving her swimming in a current that wanted to pull her under, push her down, end her story in muddy darkness. But German shepherds were bred to work, to persist, to complete the mission regardless of cost. And Grace's mission, encoded in DNA and reinforced by training, was simple: protect the pack. Her pack was now in the old man's hands, therefore the old man was pack, therefore she would not stop until she reached him or died trying. The current had carried her a quarter-mile downstream in minutes. Her powerful legs, built for running and jumping, adapted to swimming with instinctive efficiency. But the debris made every stroke dangerous. A barn door, complete with horseshoe still nailed to it, missed her head by inches. Someone's mattress, waterlogged and spinning, created a whirlpool that nearly sucked her under. Then she heard it, the unmistakable whimper of a puppy in distress. Not one of hers. She'd counted, knew all 3 were with the man who smelled of medicine and old sorrow. This was different, coming from a cluster of debris caught against what remained of a grain silo. Grace altered course, fighting cross-current to reach the sound. There, tangled in chicken wire and fence posts, was another German shepherd, male, older, fur gray around the muzzle. He was keeping a puppy afloat, not his own, judging by scent, but a mixed breed, maybe 3 weeks old. The older dog's strength was failing, his head barely above water, but his jaws remained locked on the puppy's scruff. Grace grabbed the fence post with her teeth, using it as leverage to pull herself closer. The older male's eyes met hers, clouded with age but sharp with purpose. He tried to transfer the puppy to her, but Grace did something else instead. She positioned herself beside him, shoulder to shoulder, sharing the burden of staying afloat. Together they could manage what neither could alone. "Breathe, Bill. Come on, you ornery bastard. Breathe." Marcus Webb's arms burned from compressions. 6 minutes of CPR, though it felt like hours. Tyler held the puppies against his chest, trying to keep them warm with his body heat while rain poured down. In the distance, sirens wailed, but the roads were washing out faster than help could navigate them. "Mr. Webb," Tyler said quietly, "it's been too long. Maybe we should—" That's when Bill coughed. Not breathing yet, not conscious, but his body convulsed, expelling river water. Marcus turned him on his side, supporting his head as more water came up. "That's it, Bill. Fight, you stubborn son of a—" Bill's eyes opened, unfocused, pupils dilated. His mouth moved, forming a single word. "Grace." "The puppies are safe," Marcus assured him, though he had no idea who Grace was. "You saved them, Bill. All 3. But Bill's hand clawed at Marcus's shirt, surprising strength in the grip. "Grace," he repeated, clearer now. "In the river. Save Grace." "Who's Grace?" "Bill." "Who?" Bill's eyes rolled back. His breathing, barely re-established, became ragged. Marcus resumed compressions, but now he was looking at the river, wondering who else was out there, who else this dying old man was trying to save. The helicopter swept in low over Riverside, giving Sarah her first look at the devastation. The town she remembered from Christmas visits and summer birthdays was gone, replaced by a brown lake, punctuated by rooftops and treetops. Cars floated upside down. The Presbyterian church where her parents had married was water to the steeple. "Jesus," one of the veterans muttered. "Looks like the Mekong Delta." Mike Dennison pointed toward the eastern shore. "There, see that cluster of vehicles? That's got to be them." The pilot, a woman who looked too young to have seen Afghanistan, banked sharply. "No place to land. I'll have to hover." "Who's going down?" "I am," Sarah said. "Ma'am, with respect, you're not trained—" "I'm a certified EMT," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the lie. She'd taken one first aid course years ago for her real estate license. "And he's my father. I'm going." Mike studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Martinez, rig her up. Johnson, you go with her." The next 5 minutes passed in a blur of harness straps and shouted instructions. Then Sarah was descending on a cable, wind from the rotors whipping her hair, rain stinging her face. Johnson, compact, efficient, probably 65 years old, descended beside her, medic bag strapped to his chest. They touched down in knee-deep water 20 feet from where Marcus Webb knelt beside a still form. "He's in and out," Marcus shouted over the helicopter noise. "Heartbeat's irregular. Keeps asking for someone named Grace." Sarah dropped beside her father, barely recognizing the gray face, the blue lips. "Dad! Dad, it's Sarah. I'm here." Bill's eyes fluttered open, found her face. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then, with painful clarity, "Sarah, you came?" "Of course I came, you stubborn." Her voice broke. "Johnson, what do you need?" Johnson was already working, fingers on Bill's pulse, stethoscope out despite the chaos. "Defib, now." "This rhythm's about to go south." Sarah helped strip Bill's wet shirt, trying not to see how thin he'd gotten, how the skin hung loose on a frame that had once been powerful. Johnson placed the pads with practiced efficiency. "Clear!" Bill's body jerked. The portable monitor showed chaos, then settled into something resembling normal rhythm. "We need to move. Now," Johnson said. "This is just buying time." But Bill's hand caught Sarah's wrist. "Grace," he whispered. "German. Shepherd. In the river. She's Sarah. She's Duke's granddaughter. Your dog. You named her." Memory crashed through Sarah like voltage. A bitter fight 5 years ago. Her marriage falling apart. Moving out in a rage, leaving the dog because David had paid for her, because taking Grace would mean admitting the marriage was really over. Her father's cruel words, "Just like you to abandon anything that needs you." Dad, oh God, Grace. That was Grace? Save her, Bill breathed. Like I couldn't before. 2 miles downstream, Grace and the older German shepherd had found temporary refuge on what had once been someone's back porch, now floating free. The puppy lay between them, exhausted but alive. The older dog's breathing was labored, his strength nearly gone, but his eyes remained alert, watching the water for threats. Grace nudged him gently, canine communication that transcended words. She could smell death on him, not injury, but age and exhaustion. He'd been in the water too long, fought too hard. But also, beneath the river's stink and fear, she smelled something else, something familiar. The old dog turned his head, sniffing her in return. His tail, what she could see of it, attempted a wag. Recognition dawned in his clouded eyes. He knew her scent, or rather, the scent she carried. The bloodline scent, the Duke scent. A helicopter thundered overhead, searchlight sweeping the water. Grace barked, standing despite the unstable platform, trying to draw attention. The older dog joined her, his voice hoarse but determined. The puppy, awakened by the noise, added its tiny voice to theirs. The searchlight swept past, returned, held. The helicopter circled, descending. In the emergency basket being winched up to the helicopter, Bill Hartley's heart stopped for the second time. Sarah held his hand while Johnson worked, pumping medication into IVs, charging the defibrillator again. Below them, Riverside disappeared under water that showed no sign of stopping. "Daddy, hold on," Sarah begged. "Please, just hold on." Bill's lips moved. Sarah leaned close. "Eleanor," he whispered, "tell her I understood. Finally understood. Daddy, Mom's gone. She's—" "No." His grip tightened with surprising strength. The letter, desk, hidden, drawer. She knew. Everything. Planned. The monitor screamed. Johnson moved Sarah aside, began compressions. The basket swayed, caught by wind as they rose toward the helicopter. Below, the Missouri River continued its ancient work, indifferent to human drama, carrying everything toward the sea. But also below, spotted by Mike Dennison's sharp eyes, 2 German shepherds and a puppy waited on a floating porch. The helicopter pilot was already calculating wind speed, fuel reserves, the weight limit of the rescue winch. Possible, but only just. "We've got more survivors," Mike called to Sarah. "Dogs, 2 adults and a baby." Sarah looked down through tears, saw the shepherds clearly in the searchlight. Even from this height, even through rain and chaos, she recognized the way one of them sat, patient and proper despite everything. "Grace," she breathed, then louder to the pilot. "We go back. We get them all. Ma'am, your father needs a hospital." would die of shame if we left them." It was Johnson who spoke, still working on Bill, not looking up from his efforts. "Known this stubborn bastard 40 years. Save the dogs or he'll haunt us all." The pilot banked hard, circling back. Below, Grace watched them come, her tail wagging now, understanding somehow that the mechanical bird overhead meant rescue, meant hope, meant her puppies would live. Beside her, the older shepherd gathered himself for one more effort. When the basket descended, he would need strength to help Grace get the puppy aboard. One more mission, one more save. Then maybe he could rest. The river rose. The helicopter descended. And somewhere between heaven and earth, between life and death, between past and future, the threads of a story 50 years in the making began to weave together. Bill's heart stuttered, stopped, restarted. Sarah held his hand and prayed to a God she'd stopped believing in when her mother died. Grace prepared to trust humans one more time, and in the distance, growing louder, came the sound of more helicopters. The river rats were coming. All of them. The basket descended toward the floating porch where Grace waited, its metal frame swaying in the downdraft from the helicopter's rotors. Sarah pressed against the window, watching Johnson manage her father's failing body with one hand while directing the winch operator with the other. Bill's monitor showed a rhythm that barely qualified as life, 40 beats per minute, irregular, fading. 2 minutes to St. Mary's, the pilot announced. They're standing by. But Sarah couldn't look away from the dogs below. Grace had positioned herself at the edge of the makeshift raft, the puppy in her mouth, ready. The older shepherd, gray-muzzled, exhausted, magnificent, stood beside her despite legs that shook with fatigue. Even from this height, Sarah could see his ribs, the way his head drooped between efforts to stay alert. The basket touched down, immediately tilting as the porch section rolled with the current. Grace didn't hesitate. She placed the puppy in the basket's center, then turned back for the older dog. But he wasn't following. Instead, he pressed his nose to Grace's neck, a gesture so deliberately tender that Sarah's breath caught, then stepped back. "No," Sarah whispered. "Both of them. Get both." The older shepherd sat down in a perfect heel position, the same military precision Bill had taught every dog he'd trained. His eyes met Grace's, held them, then deliberately looked away. Permission to leave. Order to survive. Grace whined, pawed at him, but the basket was already lifting. She made her choice in an instant, leaping aboard just as the cable went taut. Behind her, the older dog watched them rise, his tail wagging once, satisfied, complete. Then the porch rolled, caught by a cross-current, and he was gone. 15 seconds to drop off, the pilot said. Make it count. The helicopter hovered over St. Mary's rooftop helipad, where a trauma team waited in the rain. Sarah kissed her father's forehead as they prepared to lower him. His skin felt cold, waxy, already departing. "I'll find Grace," she promised. "I'll save them all. Daddy, please." Bill's eyes opened, focused on her with sudden, terrible clarity. "The letter," he managed. "Eleanor. Knew. Planned it. All." Then the basket was descending, taking him away, and Sarah was left with Johnson and a helicopter full of Vietnam veterans who looked at her with understanding that transcended words. "Ma'am," Mike Dennison said gently, "we've got fuel for one more run. Where do you want to look?" Sarah wiped her eyes, forced herself to think. "The dam. If Grace's raft kept going, she'd be near the spillway by now." "That's a recovery mission, not a rescue," someone said quietly. "No." Sarah's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Grace is smart, scary smart. She'd find a way." The pilot was already banking east. Below them, Riverside had ceased to exist as a town. becoming instead an extension of the river itself. The riverside dam loomed ahead, its spillways roaring with overflow, a concrete barrier between controlled release and catastrophe. That's when they saw it. A utility building on the dam's western edge, water halfway up its walls but still standing. On its flat roof, 3 dogs lay huddled together, Grace curled around 2 puppies. "How the hell?" Johnson breathed. But Sarah was already strapping into the descent harness. She swam against the current, found the one structure that wouldn't go under. Her hands shook as she checked the clips. Just like Dad taught her, like he taught all of them. Complete the mission, no matter what. At St. Mary's Trauma Bay, Dr. Patricia Chen worked on Bill Hartley with the focused intensity of someone refusing to accept defeat. 23 years in emergency medicine had taught her that some patients fought and some surrendered. Bill seemed balanced exactly between the two, his body failing while something deeper refused to quit. "He's saying something," the nurse reported. "Keeps repeating it." Dr. Chen leaned close to Bill's lips, heard the whispered word, "Duke." "His dog?" the nurse asked. "Maybe." Dr. Chen checked his pupils, found them responsive despite everything. "Mr. Hartley? Bill? I'm Dr. Chen. You're safe. Your daughter is safe." Bill's hand moved, searching. Dr. Chen took it, felt the desperate strength in his grip. "Duke," he said clearer. "Tell Mike. Duke too. Still alive." Dr. Chen exchanged glances with her team. Hypoxia could cause hallucinations, confusion. But something in Bill's eyes suggested otherwise. This wasn't delirium. This was intelligence, trying to communicate through a failing body. "I'll tell Mike," she promised. "Now let us help you." Bill's grip relaxed. His eyes closed. The monitor showed his heart finding something like rhythm, as if delivering the message had finally given him permission to rest. Sarah rappelled onto the utility building's roof, rain making every surface treacherous. Grace was on her feet instantly, but she didn't charge forward. Instead, she waited, watching Sarah with eyes that held too much understanding. "Hey, girl," Sarah managed through tears. "Remember me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Grace's tail wagged once, cautiously. Then she stepped aside, revealing not 2 but 3 puppies. Her original 3, plus the mixed breed from the river. All alive, all tucked against her belly for warmth. "You saved 4 babies?" Sarah laughed through her tears, reaching for the harness. "Of course you did. You're Duke's granddaughter." That's when the building shuddered. The dam structure, built in 1953 and reinforced twice since, wasn't designed for this level of pressure. The utility building, added in 1987, sat on a foundation already compromised by decades of small floods. Now, with water pushing from all sides, concrete began to crack. "Now!" Johnson's voice crackled through the radio. "Get them up now!" Sarah clipped Grace to the harness first, hands flying through movements she'd only learned minutes ago. The building lurched, tilting 5 degrees toward the spillway. One puppy rolled, sliding toward the edge. Grace lunged for it, but she was already attached to the rising cable. Sarah dove, catching the puppy just as its tiny body would have gone over. The roof tilted more. 10 degrees. 15. She wrapped the puppy inside her jacket, grabbed the other 3, and held them against her chest as the building began its final collapse. The last thing she saw before the world exploded into white water was Grace above her, ascending toward safety, howling with a desperation that transcended species. Mike Dennison didn't hesitate. As Sarah disappeared into the churning spillway, he was already out of his seat, clipping onto the backup winch line. "Going after her," he announced. Mike, no! Johnson grabbed his arm. The current, that's Bill's daughter. Mike shook him off. Bill saved my ass in '71. River rats don't leave anyone behind, the other veterans finished in unison. The pilot held position despite winds that wanted to slam them into the dam. Mike went over the side, 68 years old and arthritic, dropping toward water that had already claimed so many. Above him, Grace fought against her harness, trying to return to Sarah, her howls audible even over the rotor noise. Sarah surfaced 50 yards downstream, still clutching the puppies. The current had her, was pulling her toward the main spillway where thousands of gallons per second shot through concrete channels. She had maybe 30 seconds before physics made rescue impossible. Mike hit the water hard, let the current take him while steering with his arms. Vietnam had taught him about rivers, about reading water, about the difference between fighting and flowing. He reached Sarah just as she went under again, got an arm around her waist, held on as she gasped and choked. "Got you," he grunted. "Hold those pups. I've got you." The winch line went taut. For a moment, current fought cable. Helicopter engines screamed, and Mike thought his shoulder would dislocate. Then they were rising, slow but steady, Sarah's death grip on the puppies never loosening. They broke the surface tension just as the utility building completed its collapse, tons of concrete vanishing into the spillway where they'd been seconds before. In the helicopter, Grace broke free from Johnson's grip, pushing against the window, whining with joy as Sarah was hauled aboard. The reunion was wordless, woman and dog colliding in a tangle of wet fur and tears, while 4 puppies mewed between them. "St. Mary's!" Mike gasped, collapsing into a seat. "Now!" But the pilot was already ahead of him, engines at full power, racing against time and Bill Hartley's failing heart. They landed on the helipad just as Code Blue was called in Trauma 1. Sarah ran, still carrying puppies, Grace at her heels. Security tried to stop them. No animals in the hospital, but Johnson bulled through, his Vietnam unit patch better than any ID. "Medical necessity," he barked. "That dog's the only medicine that might work." They burst into the trauma bay to find Dr. Chen performing compressions on Bill's still chest. The monitor showed flatline, time of death being discussed. "Wait," Sarah pushed forward. "Grace, speak! Speak for Grandpa!" Grace's bark exploded through the sterile space, sharp, commanding, the kind of bark that meant alert, danger. "Wake up!" In Vietnam, it would have saved soldiers from ambush. Here, it cut through whatever darkness had claimed Bill Hartley. The monitor blipped. Once, twice. "I've got rhythm," Dr. Chen said, disbelief coloring her professional tone. "I've got—" "How?" Bill's eyes opened, found Grace immediately. His hand lifted, shaking, and Grace pressed her head into his palm. His fingers found the old collar, the tag that read Duke on one side and Grace on the other. "Good girl," he whispered. "Mission complete." Then he saw Sarah, muddy and soaked, puppies still clutched to her chest. "You jumped in the river," he said, wonder in his voice. "You jumped in for them." "I jumped in for you," Sarah corrected, her voice breaking. "For all of you. Like Mom always said, love multiplies." Bill smiled, the expression transforming his gray face. "She set this up. All of it. The smart girl." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "The letter," Bill managed. "Hidden drawer." She knew about Grace, where she was. Bought the land nearby, waited for the right storm. His eyes drifted closed, but the monitor showed steady rhythm now. Dr. Chen checked his vitals, shook her head in amazement. "He's stabilizing. I don't understand it, but he's actually stabilizing." In the corner, Mike Dennison was on his phone, talking rapidly. "Yeah, Duke 2. Bill said Duke 2 is still alive. No, I don't know how he knows. Just trust me. Start looking near the dam." Grace settled beside Bill's bed, her puppies arranged around her, standing guard. Sarah sank into a chair, exhaustion hitting like a sledgehammer. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear more helicopters arriving, the river rat's network expanding, searching. Outside, the Missouri River continued to rise, indifferent to human drama. But inside, Trauma 1, something had shifted. The monitor's steady beep became a rhythm of hope. Grace's breathing synchronized with Bill's. Sarah found herself praying again, not for miracles, but for time. Time to read her mother's letter. Time to understand the plan. Time to heal what had been broken. Dr. Chen made notes in Bill's chart, medical terminology for what she'd witnessed. But the margin notes, the ones she'd keep private, said simply, patient responded to canine vocalization, love as medical intervention, research further. The storm would end, the water would recede, the town would rebuild or relocate. But first, in this moment between crisis and resolution, a family, human and canine, living and remembered, held together against the current. The morning after the rescue broke gray and still, the storm finally exhausted. In ICU Room 3, machines breathed for Bill Hartley while his body fought its own quiet war. Sarah hadn't left his side except to check on Grace and the puppies, who were being kept in a hastily arranged space in the hospital's maintenance room. The administration had bent rules that hadn't been bent since therapy dogs were controversial. At 6:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after Bill had entered the river, Sarah remembered the letter. She'd been holding his hand, talking about nothing, the weather, the news that Riverside was officially a total loss, how Grace had refused food until Sarah hand-fed her, when his words from the trauma bay surfaced through her exhaustion. Hidden drawer. Eleanor's desk. I have to go, she told the day nurse, a woman whose name tag read Brenda and whose eyes held the particular kindness of someone who'd seen too much. To my father's cabin. There's something, honey. There is no cabin. The whole east side of Riverside is under 15 feet of water. Sarah stared at her, processing this reality. Everything gone. Her childhood home, her mother's gardens, the desk where Eleanor had written thank you notes and birthday cards, and apparently orchestrated something impossible from beyond the grave. Ma'am, a voice from the doorway. Marcus Webb stood there, muddy boots and exhausted eyes. Heard you might need this. He held out a waterlogged banker's box. Found it wedged in your dad's truck. Truck was in a tree 2 miles downstream, but this box was jammed under the seat tight, mostly dry. Sarah's hands shook as she took it, her mother's handwriting on the label. For Sarah and Bill, open together. Inside, wrapped in plastic like Eleanor knew it would face flood, was a manila envelope. Sarah opened it with Marcus still standing there, this man who'd saved her father, who deserved to witness whatever revelation was coming. The first document was a property deed. Sarah recognized the address, 5 acres just north of Riverside, the old Paulson farm that had been for sale forever, purchased by Eleanor Hartley 2 years ago, 3 weeks before her death, paid in cash. The second was a letter in her mother's precise script. My dearest Sarah and Bill, if you're reading this together, then God has more humor than I credited him with. It means the storm came, the river rose, and you both did exactly what I knew you would. Threw yourselves into danger for something you love. Bill, honey, I know about the foreclosure. I've known for months. Just like I know you've been rationing your heart pills, skipping doses to make them last. You stubborn fool. Did you think I spent 45 years as your wife without learning your tells? Sarah, sweetheart, I know about the divorce, the debt, the way you blame your father for not fighting harder to save me, but darling girl, I didn't want to be saved, not like that, not with tubes and machines and another 6 months of agony. I wanted to die as myself, with dignity, with my loves beside me. The money from my life insurance, yes, Bill, there's more than you knew about, is in trust. The conditions are simple. You must both sign for it, together, in person, which means you must both be alive and speaking to each other. The land I bought floods regularly. Did you know that? The Paulsons couldn't sell because every spring the river claims it, but that's exactly why I wanted it. Because every spring, things wash up there. Lost things, abandoned things, things that need saving, like Duke. Not the first Duke, Bill, but his grandson, who was sold to a man in Riverside who didn't deserve him. Duke, who escaped 5 years ago during a flood and has been living wild ever since. Duke, who saves other dogs from the river because that's what his bloodline does. And Grace? Sarah's dog, who she abandoned when her world fell apart. Grace, who found her way to Duke because broken things recognize each other. By now, if my timing is right, and when have I ever been wrong about timing, you've met them both. You've risked everything to save them. And maybe, just maybe, you've remembered that love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go and when to jump in. The cabin is gone. Bill, let it go. The past is gone. Sarah, let it go. But the future is there on that marshy, problematic, beautiful piece of land that needs 2 stubborn Hartleys to make it into something worthwhile, build something new, something that honors what we've lost by saving what we can. All my love, Eleanor. P.S. Bill, take your damn pills, both doses, every day. That's not a request. P.P.S. Sarah. Your father cried every night for a month after you left. He just did it in the shed where you couldn't hear. P.P.P.S. There's a veterinarian in Jefferson City who specializes in traumatized animals, Dr. Monica Chen, Patricia Chen's sister. I've already spoken with her about Duke and any friends he might have. She's expecting your call. Sarah read it twice, then handed it to Marcus, who read it slowly, his lips moving with the words. When he finished, he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Your mama was something else, he said finally. She was dying, Sarah whispered. This whole time she was dying and planning this. Ma'am, Marcus said gently, I knew Eleanor Hartley for 30 years. That woman could plan a church supper, a town fundraiser, and a wedding all at the same time. You think a little thing like cancer was going to stop her from fixing her family? Bill's monitors beeped, drawing their attention. His eyes were open, focused on Sarah. Did you find it? He whispered. Sarah held up the letter. She knew everything. The whole time. A sound came from Bill that might have been a laugh or a sob. Course she did. Woman never met a problem she couldn't outmaneuver. His eyes found the deed. She bought land? Flood land. Rescue land. For the dogs you and Duke are going to save. Duke's dead, baby girl. Died in my arms in 71. Duke too, Dad, Grandpa Duke. He's alive. Has been living wild, saving dogs from the river for years. Bill's heart monitor spiked. Dr. Chen appeared as if summoned, checked his vitals with professional efficiency. Mr. Hartley, you need to stay calm. Doc, Bill gasped. You got a sister named Monica? Dr. Chen stopped cold. How could you possibly know that? Sarah held up the letter. My mother knew everything, apparently, including your family tree. For the first time since they'd met her, Patricia Chen looked genuinely stunned. Monica mentioned an Eleanor Hartley calling about setting up some kind of rescue facility. But that was 2 years ago. We thought it was just another well-meaning idea that wouldn't. She trailed off, understanding dawning. Your mother planned all this? The flood, the rescue, everything? Not the flood, Sarah said. But everything else. Yeah. Mom didn't believe in coincidence. She believed in preparation. Bill's hand found Sarah's. The old Duke saved my life, died doing it. Spent 50 years thinking I failed him by surviving. Dad, no, let me finish. Duke too, if he's real, if he's out there, he's been doing what I couldn't, saving lives, being useful, being ready. His grip tightened. Your mother knew I needed to see that, needed to know the mission continued. Dr. Chen was making notes, but her clinical detachment had cracked. Mr. Hartley, are you saying there's a semi-feral German Shepherd who's been conducting water rescues independently for years? That's exactly what he's saying, Mike Dennison said from the doorway. Behind him stood 2 other veterans, muddy and exhausted. Because we just found him. Duke, too, along with 7 other dogs he'd gathered on high ground near the Paulson place. Your mama's land, according to the sheriff. How did you... German Shepherd, approximately 14 years old, distinctive scar pattern consistent with military working dog identification, still wearing tags. Mike held up a mud-covered collar. Registration number matches the K9 Corps records from 2010. Duke 2, missing in action during a training exercise flood response. Bill tried to sit up, was pushed down by multiple hands. 14 years. He's been out there 14 years. Saving dogs, Mike confirmed. According to the animal control folks we talked to, there have been stories for years about a ghost dog who pulls others from the river. They thought it was legend. Sarah felt tears she didn't know she had left. Where is he now? County Animal Shelter. Getting checked out. He's in rough shape. Malnourished, heartworm positive. Arthritis, you wouldn't believe. But Doc there says he'll make it. Tough old bastard, just like his handler. Bill's eyes closed, but his vitals remained steady. Bring him here. Dad, you can't have a dog in ICU. I had Grace earlier, Bill interrupted without opening his eyes. What's one more? Besides, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. What are they going to do? Kick out the dying old man whose story is probably going viral on social media as we speak? Dr. Chen sighed. I'll make some calls. Therapy animal exemption. But Mr. Hartley, you have to promise to focus on recovering. Your heart, my heart, Bill said quietly, has been broken for 50 years. Maybe it's time to let it heal. Outside the hospital windows, the sun broke through clouds for the first time in 4 days. The floodwaters had begun to recede, leaving mud and devastation, but also possibility. Somewhere in Riverside's ruins, insurance adjusters would soon be calculating losses. But in ICU Room 3, the calculations were different, measured in found dogs, rebuilt connections, and a mother's love that transcended death itself. Sarah pulled out her phone, looked up the number for Dr. Monica Chen. It was time to start building what Eleanor had envisioned. Not just a rescue facility, but a place where broken things, human and canine, could find each other. River Rats Recovery Ranch, she said aloud, testing the words. Bill's eyes opened. Your mother would have liked that. No, Sarah corrected, squeezing his hand. Mom would have said we're thinking too small. She'd want a full veterinary clinic, training facility, and veterans therapy program. For the first time in 2 years, Bill Hartley smiled with his whole face. Then I guess we better get to work. The truth arrived in pieces like debris washing up after a flood. First came the medical tests that revealed Bill's heart medication had been diluted, not criminally, but because he'd been cutting pills in half and quarters, stretching a 30-day supply to 90. Dr. Chen's review of his records showed a pattern of delayed refills, missed appointments, and excuses about insurance confusion that painted a picture of proud poverty. Your father's been dying by degrees for 2 years, Dr. Chen told Sarah bluntly. They stood in the hallway while Bill slept, Grace curled on a special mat beside his bed. not just from heart disease, from isolation, malnutrition, and untreated depression. The flood might have saved his life by forcing intervention. Sarah stared through the observation window at her father's sleeping form. He was choosing to die. Many elderly do, especially after losing a spouse. They just stop fighting. The second revelation came from Mike Dennison, who'd been digging through military records with the persistence of a man repaying a 50-year debt. He found Sarah in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m., surviving on vending machine coffee and guilt. "Your dad never told you how Duke really died, did he?" Sarah shook her head. Mike pulled out a yellowed report. "Duke didn't just save Bill's unit from an ambush. He saved a whole village. VC had rigged the water supply with explosives, planning to blame it on us. Duke detected it, alerted, wouldn't let anyone near. When they tried to defuse it..." He paused, struggled. "Duke held his position even when the preliminary charge went off. Gave everyone time to evacuate. 300 civilians, mostly kids. My God. Bill carried that dog's body 4 miles through hostile territory because he wouldn't leave him behind. Nearly got court-martialed for refusing a direct order to abandon the remains. That's why Duke got the service burial, why his bloodline was preserved in the breeding program." Mike leaned forward. "Your dad didn't fail Duke. He honored him the only way he could." The third revelation was the most devastating. It came from the lawyer handling Eleanor's estate, a nervous man named Patterson, who arrived with a briefcase full of documents requiring signatures. "Mrs. Hartley was very specific about timing," he explained, spreading papers across the hospital room's tray table. "These were to be delivered only after you'd both read her letter." Bill, more alert now after 3 days of proper medication and IV nutrition, studied the documents with growing amazement. She liquidated her retirement account, sold her jewelry, even cashed in that savings bond her father left her. "Total value approximately $300,000, Patterson confirmed. "Placed in trust 2 years ago with very specific conditions for release." Sarah read the conditions, her mother's personality evident in every clause. Bill and Sarah must both be alive and present to sign. The land must be used for animal rescue. At least 50% of animals helped must be at no cost to owners. Veterans receive priority assistance. The facility must be named Eleanor's Grace. "There's one more thing," Patterson said, producing a DVD. "She insisted this be watched together after everything else." They used Dr. Chen's office laptop. Eleanor appeared on screen, thin but radiant, wearing the blue dress Bill had bought her for their 40th anniversary. The video was dated 1 week before her death. "Hello, my loves," Eleanor began, her voice stronger than her body suggested. "If you're watching this, then my plan worked, and you're probably mad at me for manipulating you. Good. At least you're feeling something together." Bill made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Sarah gripped his hand. "Bill, honey, I need you to hear this. Duke's death wasn't your failure. It was his victory. He did exactly what he was born to do, save lives, just like you've been trying to do ever since, even when you didn't realize it. Every dog you trained carried Duke's spirit forward." Eleanor paused, clearly gathering strength. "Sarah, sweetheart, your anger at your father was really anger at me for dying. I know that. He knows that. But anger is just love with nowhere to go. So I'm giving you somewhere to put it. Build something. Save something. Be the family I know you still are." She smiled then, the expression luminous despite her frailty. "I've arranged for Duke 2 to be found during the next major flood. Don't ask how I know. Call it faith or call it playing the odds. But he's been waiting, just like you've been waiting. Broken things always find each other in the end." The video shifted. Eleanor was holding something, a photo album Sarah recognized. One more surprise. Bill, remember that nice young couple who bought the Schultz place 5 years ago? The ones with the German shepherd who looked so much like Duke. That wasn't coincidence. That was Sarah and David before the divorce. She brought Duke's bloodline back to Riverside because even when she was angriest with you, she was still trying to come home. Sarah's breath caught. She'd never told her mother about buying Grace specifically because she resembled the old photos of Duke, had never admitted even to herself why she'd chosen that particular dog. So, you see, Eleanor continued, Grace isn't just Duke's descendant. She's a bridge between you, between past and future, between what was lost and what can be found. Take care of her. Take care of each other. And remember, love multiplies, but only if you let it. The screen went dark. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Bill spoke, his voice rough. She knew I was skipping medication. She knew everything, Sarah agreed. Knew you'd come back when I needed you most. Knew you'd jump in the river for a dog that reminded you of Duke. Knew we'd both be too stubborn to die before reconciling. Patterson cleared his throat. There's actually a postscript in the trust documents. She predicted you'd both try to find logical explanations for the coincidences. Her response was, quote, sometimes God works through weather patterns in real estate deals. Stop questioning and start building. Dr. Monica Chen arrived that afternoon, having driven from Jefferson City with a van full of medical equipment. She looked enough like her sister that Bill did a double take, but where Patricia was all clinical efficiency, Monica radiated the calm of someone who spoke fluent dog. I've been expecting this call for 2 years, she said, examining Grace while her puppies tumbled around the hospital room floor. Sha. Your mother contacted me about creating a veterinary partnership with a rescue facility. I thought she was just another dreamer until she sent a business plan that included 5-year projections, funding sources, and a marketing strategy. That sounds like Mom, Sarah said. She also sent this. Monica produced a check, post-dated 2 years. For my first month's salary, to prove she was serious, I've kept it in my desk, waiting. Bill watched from his bed as Monica examined each puppy with gentle expertise. What about Duke, too? Ah, Monica's expression grew serious. I examined him yesterday. 14 years of survival have taken their toll. Severe arthritis, dental disease, multiple old injuries. But his heart is strong, and his mind... She smiled. His mind is extraordinary. He's been not just surviving, but actively rescuing other animals for over a decade. The shelter has records of at least 40 dogs found in flood conditions with evidence of having been dragged to safety. Can he be rehabilitated? With time, medication, and patience. He'll never be young again, but he could have quality years left. The question is whether he'll accept human help after so long wild. He will, Bill said with certainty. He's Duke's grandson. Duty runs in the bloodline. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mike Dennison entered, followed by 2 shelter workers carrying a stretcher. On it lay a German shepherd whose noble bearing showed through the gray muzzle and clouded eyes. Duke, too. The old dog's head lifted as they brought him in, nostrils flaring. His gaze found Bill, held, then shifted to Grace. A low whine escaped him, not distress but recognition. Grace responded with her own vocalization, moving toward him despite Monica's restraining hand. Let them, Bill said quietly. They need to meet. What followed was a conversation without words. Grace approached slowly, head low in respect. Duke Two's tail, matted and thin, attempted a wag. They touched noses, circled, sniffed. Then Grace did something remarkable. She brought him one of her puppies, placing it gently beside him. Duke Two's clouded eyes cleared for a moment. He nosed the puppy carefully, then looked at Bill with an expression so reminiscent of the first Duke that time seemed to fold in on itself. "I know, boy," Bill whispered. "Mission continues." Later, as afternoon shadows lengthened and the hospital settled into evening routine, Sarah found herself making lists on her phone. Contractors to call, permits to file, equipment to source. The work of building Eleanor's Grace stretched ahead, daunting but no longer impossible. "Mom really did plan everything," she said to no one in particular. "Not everything," Bill corrected from his bed. He was sitting up now, Duke 2 on one side, Grace on the other, looking more alive than he had in years. "She couldn't plan for you to be as brave as you were, jumping into that water after me." "I learned from the best," Sarah replied, then clarified. "From Mom. She jumped into everything feet first." Bill smiled. "That she did. That she did." 3 months later, on a morning when the Missouri River ran calm and silver, Eleanor's Grace held its grand opening. The July sun blessed the 5 acres of recovered floodplain with golden light, and the smell of barbecue from the river rat's grill mixed with fresh paint and hope. Bill stood at the entrance, Duke 2 steady at his side despite the arthritis medication that only partially eased 14 years of wear. The old dog wore a service vest now, therapy dog in training, though everyone knew he was the teacher, not the student. His eyes, clouded but alert, tracked every movement as visitors arrived. "Never thought I'd see this," Marcus Webb said, pumping Bill's hand. "Your Eleanor, she really did think of everything." The facility sprawled before them. A veterinary clinic where Monica Chen was already examining a retriever mix someone had found wandering after the flood, kennels built to withstand future disasters, and a training field where Grace worked with Sarah, demonstrating basic commands for a group of veteran volunteers. "She didn't think of everything," Bill admitted, watching his daughter move with Grace in perfect synchronization. "She couldn't have known Sarah would be this good at training. Natural talent, just like her dad," Marcus finished. "Apple doesn't fall far, even when it tries." The puppies, now 3 months old and showing their mixed heritage in interesting ways, tumbled across the grass in a supervised play area. The smallest, the cream-colored one Bill had saved first, had been claimed by Mike Dennison. "Little Duke," he called her, gender notwithstanding. The others would go to carefully vetted homes, but not yet. Not until they were ready. "Mr. Hartley?" A young woman approached, holding a manila envelope. "I'm Jennifer, from the documentary crew. We're hoping to interview you about the rescue, about your wife's plan, about Duke, all the Dukes." Bill glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly from across the field. "All right," he said, "but Duke too stays with me. He's part of the story." They filmed under the oak tree Eleanor had insisted be protected in the construction plans. Bill spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence about Vietnam, about loss, about the strange mathematics of grief where losing one thing sometimes meant finding another. "My wife understood something I didn't," he said, one hand resting on Duke 2's head. "She knew that love doesn't divide when you share it. It multiplies. Every dog I trained after Duke carried his spirit forward. Every life they saved honored his sacrifice. I just couldn't see it until, Jennifer prompted gently, until I was drowning, and Grace, Duke's great-granddaughter, trusted me with her babies. Trusted me the way Duke trusted me. That's when I understood. The mission never ended. It just changed shape." Later, as the sun began its descent toward the river, Sarah found her father sitting on the new dock they'd built at the water's edge. Grace lay on one side, Duke 2 on the other, a perfect bookend of past and future. "Mom would have loved this," Sarah said, settling beside him. "She does love it," Bill corrected. Present tense. Love like hers doesn't stop just because—" He paused, pointed. There, walking along the riverbank, was the documentary crew filming B-roll. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the way the evening light caught the water, turning it to gold, and for just a moment he could swear he smelled lavender on the breeze. "You know what she'd say?" Sarah asked. Bill smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Stop sitting around congratulating yourselves and get back to work. There are more dogs to save." They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, while the river flowed on and the dogs dozed, and somewhere in the evening sky the first stars began their watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new chances to multiply love. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to sit together and remember that broken things could heal, lost things could be found, and even the deepest rivers could be crossed with faith, hope, and a good dog by your side. The documentary would air nationwide 6 months later, generating millions in donations and thousands of volunteer applications. But that was still to come. For now, there was just this: a man who'd learned to live again, a daughter who'd learned to forgive, and the legacy of love that connected them all, human and canine, living and remembered, saved and saving. Eleanor had been right, as usual. Love multiplied, but only if you let it. And finally, after 50 years of division, the Hartley family was ready to do the math. Dear friends, if you're reading this at 3 a.m. because sleep won't come, if your medicine cabinet looks like a pharmacy but your heart still aches, if you've been rationing pills or skipping doses because Medicare doesn't stretch far enough, you're not alone. Bill Hartley was just like you, choosing between heart medication and keeping the lights on, living in a cabin the bank was taking, convinced his usefulness ended when he buried his wife. But here's what Eleanor knew that we forget. Love doesn't get buried with our spouses or lost in bitter arguments with our children. It multiplies, even through floodwaters and rescue ropes and the surprised face of a daughter who thought she'd lost you forever. Sometimes God works through German shepherds and VA buddies who remember what you did in '71. Sometimes salvation comes with 4 paws and a wagging tail. Your life isn't over because your knees hurt or your savings are gone or your kids live 6 states away. You still have missions to complete, love to multiply, bridges to rebuild before the final river crossing. What broken relationship in your life needs mending before it's too late? Which old friend from your service days should you call today? Leave a comment below. Your story might be the rope someone else needs to grab onto.